Since 1965, the ACEC Life Health Trust has provided innovative healthcare benefits and services to ACEC member firms. We offer a variety of benefits to meet the unique needs of your firm, including fully insured, level funded, stop loss, and ancillary products. Visit our website at aceclifehealthtrust.com to learn more about our affordable employee benefit options for ACEC member firms, backed by the financial strength of the ACEC Life Health Trust.
Welcome to the Engineering Influence podcast from the American Council of Engineering Companies. I'm Allison Schneider. I'm joined today by Matt Reiffer, Vice President of Infrastructure Programs, and Katharine Mottley, the Vice President of Tax and Workforce Policy. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, happy to join you.
Thanks, Allison.
No doubt you've heard a lot of talk in the last few days about a new deal between Senator Joe Manchin from West Virginia and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer for a bill on climate, taxes, and healthcare. This story has taken a lot of twists and turns, so we brought on these two members of the ACEC advocacy team to help us break this down. So let's give listeners a better understanding of what's going on in this potential legislation and how we got here. In the past, Senator Manchin has blocked some of President Biden's signature Build Back Better legislation and economic packages over concerns about raising taxes and new spending on climate change. We know looking ahead to the fall, Democrats are trying to get something passed here as part of their central agenda before the midterm elections. What has Senator Manchin's position been on the past in this arena, and why does he have so much power in this discussion?
Well, I think he has power because we have a 50-50 Senate. So in fact, he's not the only one who has power. He's just been exercising it, over the past several months, as you said. The House passed a substantial package. I believe it was around $3.5 trillion of spending and over $2 trillion of tax increases. And the hope was that all 50 Democratic senators would unite and agree to that. And Senator Manchin made it very clear that that was too large a package for him. And so there have been negotiations on and off, back and forth for the last number of months. But probably the wildest twist in all of this was a couple of weeks ago, Senator Manchin publicly said, he was very concerned about the inflation numbers. He was concerned about economic numbers. He did not want to necessarily, raise taxes and spend funds without seeing the numbers that would come out in August. And then mere moments after the Senate passed the competitiveness legislation that's now gone to the president for signature, all of a sudden he came out and said, by the way, I've reached an agreement with the Senate Majority Leader, and this agreement is now what's being considered by the Senate. And in particular, they're all running everything by, as you have to during the budget process, by the Senate parliamentarian to see what's going to pass muster and what's going to be in the final bill.
And Matt, this announcement was a big surprise. Senator Manchin and Schumer had come to an agreement on a bill that Senator Manchin could support. The conversations happened in private, and now we're just learning some of the details. Can you outline some of the aspects that we know are in this agreement?
Yeah, sure. And I'll just, taking a step back to follow on what Katharine was saying, the folks who have been paying attention to this in the infrastructure space will recall, back in the early days of the Biden presidency and Democratic control of the Congress, this was all one giant package of domestic tax and spending policy. And then that bipartisan group of senators decided to negotiate in good faith on the infrastructure investment portions that obviously ultimately became the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act that we were able to get enacted last fall. But for months, the debate among Democratic leaders, and particularly the progressive wing of the party, was we can't, give away the infrastructure piece without the climate piece and the tax pieces and some of the other spending initiatives and the healthcare prescription drug stuff that they wanted as well. So this has been a work in progress and has gone through lots of different machinations, obviously for the better part of, a year and a half now. But yeah, as Katharine indicated, the conversations have been taking place behind the scenes and getting to that point where you have a swing vote and what that person can agree to. But the highlights, obviously, in the energy and climate space are a number of extensions and renewals of existing production tax credits in the energy arena, the expansion of that to other markets as well as incentives for manufacturing and industrial facilities as well. And there's provisions related to nuclear energy. There's oil and gas leasing in the Gulf Coast and in Alaska. So it's really sort of an all of the above energy piece and a number of investments on the climate side looking toward more renewables and reducing carbon emissions.
Katharine, what are you looking for when you look at this legislation?
Yeah, so I'm looking at, not surprisingly, at the tax side. And it's interesting, the Build Back Better bill from last fall had a whole number of different tax provisions that touched business in different ways. This is a much more narrow tax title. So they're raising money in a couple of ways to cover the costs of the bill. One is actually outside the tax space. It's allowing Medicare to negotiate prescription drug prices, which raises revenue. And then in the tax space, there are basically a couple of provisions. One is related to carried interest for private equity and hedge funds. So not an area where I have a lot of expertise. The next one is looking at particularly large businesses and whether they're paying at least 15% effective tax rate. And then there is also substantial funding for Irs enforcement. And that is always an interesting topic because once the funding goes to the IRS, unless it's specifically designated for something like new computer systems, which they certainly need, they are working with antiquated equipment. But when they get money for enforcement, you always start to wonder who's going to be audited. So that's a big question in the business community right now, with a substantial infusion of money that would come under this bill. Where would those enforcement dollars go? So that's something that we're looking at. And then related to the climate change title, as Matt was suggesting, a lot of those provisions are actually tax provisions. So, tax incentives for renewable energy and resilience and climate change, and these are all great things. One of the interesting twists is that they have structured these so that taxpayers that meet certain labor standards, prevailing wage and apprenticeship standards, actually would get a bigger tax benefit than taxpayers that don't meet those standards. And so we're looking at all of those pieces too, while that would really fall more in the construction side of things, not so much on engineers. But we're looking at kind of what the impact would be and how that would change, how these projects move forward.
The one other piece that I'd note is there's a reinstatement of the Superfund Tax. We are going to be doing some outreach and trying to understand the implications for our energy sector and industrial clients, what that could mean for them. On the tax side, it includes the Superfund fee on oil and gas based on a per gallon price because of the carbon content there. So something we're going to look at what the implications are there and how disconcerting that might be.
Thanks for that. I know that this is a work in progress here. We're not sure what this will end up looking like. Senator Kyrsten Sinema from Arizona, she's also a name that's in the mix, an important part of this discussion. She wasn't included in the negotiations, and she's not committed to supporting this agreement yet. Where does Senator Sinema stand right now?
Well, that's the fascinating part is we don't know. She and her staff have said over the last several days, once this agreement was announced, have basically said, we're going to look at the text and, the senator will make a decision. It's a really interesting kind of power dynamic. Last fall, she was one of two senators, Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema, who both had concerns. But Senator Manchin was certainly a lot more public, and he was sort of more of the public focus. But now that he has signed on to this agreement, now she's the focus. And so far, she hasn't really expressed her position one way or another. So I think that's one of the really interesting kind of pieces of drama that's left in this conversation. I suspect she also wants to see how the parliamentary review of the bill goes. As you all know, under this budget process, only certain kinds of provisions can be included in a budget bill, and the Senate parliamentarian is the one who makes those decisions, reviews, and makes those final decisions. And so Senator Sinema may also be sort of reserving her public statement until she can see a little bit more of what comes out of the parliamentarian's office.
It's really interesting. I know Senator Manchin has been saying publicly that a lot of the things Kyrsten Sinema was looking for in this bill, and I think, as she digs into it, we'll hear more about where she stands. We had some information come out late last week about what was in there with the climate change provisions. And then on Monday, we learned that Senator Manchin got commitment from Democratic leaders for reforms to energy permitting. And that also included construction of a major natural gas pipeline in his home state of West Virginia. What are you hearing about this development?
Yeah, and this is something we've been paying very close attention to. It's a big deal for us in a number of respects. One, obviously, our member firms are the ones that help their clients conduct these environmental reviews. They do the assessments, they prepare the environmental documents, and help their agency clients navigate that. And then, obviously, we have development clients in the private sector that have to comply, and so it impacts them in that arena as well. And in the energy space, as you mentioned, and in pipeline permitting, this has been a significant challenge over the years. And unfortunately, the administration has taken some steps to undo some reforms that we had supported, and released an action plan that may or may not have an appreciable impact on infrastructure permitting, particularly in the energy space. So we're very eager to review those details of what will be included in that sort of side deal on permitting, but it could be potentially very meaningful and very beneficial and helpful. But yeah, the devil will be in the details, as it always is. This is one of those provisions, and Katharine mentioned under a budget reconciliation process, the provisions have to have an appreciable impact on spending or revenue, right? It's all tax and spending. So permitting doesn't really meet that threshold, so it has to be separate. But clearly, it was important to Senator Manchin, and it's important to a lot of developers as well. So we'll see. You never want to be left out of the thing that gets voted on first. But hopefully that commitment will remain, and that it will be meaningful in ways that appreciably make reforms to the infrastructure permitting process.
And then yet another wrinkle when it comes to gaming all of this out is that several Senate Democrats have tested positive for COVID-19 in recent days, including Senator Manchin and Senators Dick Durbin and Tina Smith, also Tom Carper. If they don't get any Republican votes, all 50 Senate Democrats would need to be present in order to pass the legislation through reconciliation. What should we be keeping an eye on as this continues to evolve?
Well, the latest senator to announce that he tested positive was Senator Cornyn. So the Republicans have the same issue. They need all 50 of theirs to be able to push back, whether it's on final passage or even on amendments. Our listeners might be interested to know that there is a very wonky insider process that's all part of this on the Senate floor that is literally referred to as vote-a-rama. And that's when, after they do the general debate, they have all kinds of amendments, and that process of working through all those amendments on the budget bill is called vote-a-rama. And so even if it's just pushing an amendment that puts a Senate Democrat who is up for re-election in a difficult position in terms of an amendment vote, even if it doesn't get included in the final bill, that's all part of the political games that happen on reconciliation. I wouldn't be at all surprised if we saw additional announcements throughout the next week or so that certain senators are quarantining. It just seems to be a regular occurrence at the moment. So yeah, I would definitely watch for that. And I would watch for the amendment votes. Again, even if these amendments don't end up passing, but it still can make for some difficult votes and some interesting campaign commercials for the senators who are up for re-election.
Matt, do you have any final thoughts for us?
Yeah, as you've indicated, there's a lot of steps between now and the president's signature, and the margins are so narrow, and the provisions, so far-reaching, and there's a lot of things to be worked out. Starting with a parliamentarian's review, and then finding out, where the other Democratic senators, particularly Senator Sinema, may be. And then, the attendance on the floor and who can vote, what the amendment process will look like if that results in any appreciable changes. So, a lot of things left to come and review and analyze.
Matt and Katharine, with so many moving parts, I know you will be watching this one closely. That was Matt Reiffer, Vice President of Infrastructure Programs, and Katharine Mottley, Vice President of Tax and Workforce Policy. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. This has been another Engineering Influence episode from the American Council of Engineering Companies. Thank you for listening.